As an individual project manager, you have to decide where you're going to play. There are definitely changes in terms of what people expect from you, even as a traditional project manager these days.
Welcome to Manage This, the podcast by project managers for project managers. Every other week, we get together to discuss what you have told us matters to you as a professional project manager. It's our chance to meet with some of the experts in the field, get inside their heads, and see what has worked for them. It's a place to share ideas and philosophies, all with the purpose of improving our own game. I'm your host, Nick Walker, and with me are the two guys who make this podcast happen, Crowe and Bill Yates. And Andy, we're fortunate enough to have an Agile expert in the house.
And this is going to be a really interesting slice that we're taking on Agile. We're going to be looking at it a little bit differently than traditionally.
Well, let's meet our non-traditional guest, all right? As a certified Scrum Master and certified Scaled Agile coach, Steve Kraus has more than 15 years' experience assisting organizations in transitioning to the Agile mindset. As the CIO of a mid-sized company, he led the conversion of their waterfall-based software construction efforts to an Agile approach. He served as a senior consultant at Deloitte Consulting, as well as a senior principal with Daugherty Business Solutions. He's currently engaged at a major local insurance company, assisting them with Agile training, coaching, and planning as they begin their Agile journey. Steve, it's a privilege to have you with us.
Thanks.
Now, we should probably start off by defining our terms just a little bit. Waterfall, Agile. Let's get into that just a little bit. What is Agile, and what is the difference between that and waterfall?
Right. So, since the pyramids were built, people have been applying kind of traditional project management approaches, right? So kind of the classic PMI, PMP certification, the iron triangle, scope, cost, resources, quality. How do you make those trade-offs, right? And then how do you manage a project using very structured approach to completion? That's kind of classic, what people call waterfall, right? Agile, a lot of folks got together probably in 2002 in a hotel room, literally, and said, this ain't working for us. We're seeing a lot of projects that are running over, almost all of them. Many projects fail. So a lot of money wasted. And they said, is there, and by the way, one thing we saw a lot of, and they saw a lot of, was IT kind of getting a black eye. So I'm an IT person. I'm not in construction or, I'm not building Mercedes-Benz. I'm building software. So IT almost got a bad reputation. It's like projects always run over. Projects never do what they're supposed to do. The end result of the project isn't really all that useful or that much value. And so Agile kind of said, let's flip that whole thing on its head. It's about value delivery. The goal is not to finish on time, on budget. The goal is to deliver something of value. It may not be the entire thing we originally aimed at. So scope is flexible, right? Resources are flexible. The second thing Agile kind of brought into the picture was saying, those traditional approaches of let's design it, let's build it, let's test it, right? And then a big bang delivery at the end, right? No, let's deliver little pieces of value and then even change direction based on those pieces. So love that, hate that. Let's do more of that, less of that. In Agile, that's okay. In Waterfall, that drives you crazy.
Right. Yeah, right.
So that's kind of the difference between
change is a 4-letter word in Waterfall.
Right. Well, right.
Unless you're the contractor who's implementing those changes, and then you get to bill for them.
That's right. That's going to cost you.
But even then, it's a nightmare.
Right.
Right. Because it's like have to submit a CR. Client doesn't want to sign it, but is still very unhappy with the situation. So even if they don't fund it and say we're not going to pay for it, they walk away with a bad taste in their mouth.
Right. I cut my teeth on Waterfall, and Nick, it was somebody said in one of our podcasts that Waterfall is sort of a pejorative term that was introduced by Agile. It was not.
No.
I was taught that was what it was called back in the early 90s. But it's this idea that things go from the top down and they become more and more progressively elaborated is the phrase that project managers love to use. But that whole idea. And so, Agile it flips that on its axis pretty sharply.
And something you said, Steve, says this isn't working for me. It kind of began the movement,
the journey,
toward,
right?
Yeah,
right.
So how do we know whether one or the other is going to work for us?
Ooh,
that's a really easy question. I'm glad Steve's here to answer it.
and I think that's the answer people are going towards now. So we did see a trend. A few years ago when Agile started to come in, what we started to run into was kind of pedantic kind of approach. It says waterfall is over. Agile is for everything.
Yeah.
Clearly, one of the trends now is, you know what? Sometimes waterfall is the right answer.
Right.
Sometimes Agile is the right answer. Sometimes a mix of those two things is the right answer. And so we're starting to see more and more of that says, what's right for this project?
And amongst some of the true believers, mixing those two is not
evil.
Yeah,
Oh,
right.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And one thing I think we're seeing is the true believers in both sides, let's be clear, right, are having to let go a little bit.
Right.
So that brings me to a question. Nick, I want to ask Steve, help us focus on the individual.
Right.
So let's say I'm the practitioner. Maybe I grew up doing traditional or waterfall approaches as a project manager.
Sure.
Now Agile is all that. It's hot. So the question that I want us to tease out today with Steve, is Agile right for me?
Right. I really think there's two questions a person has to address as a project management professional, right? One is, it is hot. So how am I going to position myself against it, right? The second thing is, the market may want me to do this. Is this something I want to do? So the fact it's hot doesn't mean it's right for you.
Yeah. Yeah. So talk about the market a little bit, Steve. I know you've done some research. You've spoken on trends. So I guess the basic question is project management, is that profession still a good way to go? Is it still in demand? And then talk about some of the trends that you're seeing in that space.
Right. So let me step back for a minute. Like, how did I get into this a little bit, right? Of course, I've been doing both for a long time, so I was familiar with the subject matter. But what we had a client of ours who basically let go of every project manager they had.
Right.
Wow.
They just let them go. It's like, as of tomorrow, we will no longer have any project managers on our staff.
Right.
And that made us step back and say, wow, is that the way this is going? Is it a fact that in 10 years, there won't be any more traditional project management? And because we're in the business, by the way, of doing that work, we were very personally interested in that. And so we did some research and we said, you know what? Do we need to deal with this? Yes, we do. This is definitely a trend that's not going away. What we were seeing was what they wanted out of project management is changing. And so you can't ignore this. As an individual project manager, you have to decide where you're going to play. But there are definitely changes in terms of what people expect from you, even as a traditional project manager these days.
It's funny. I've heard those rumors of the downfall of project managers, and it makes me think about Mark Twain's quote of the rumors of my demise are greatly exaggerated. So we certainly haven't seen any lessening in project management.
No.
But I agree with you exactly that what we expect of these people is changing. And now suddenly this task master, somebody who has mastery of all the schedule, all the tasks, all the individual components and the details, that's becoming a little bit different because nobody can do that well. Very few people can do that well.
Right.
And now we're turning it over to the team to do self-organization and self-management somewhat.
Right.
And it evolves, so the PM evolves into more of a coaching role often.
Right. This shift from I am the God, right, to I am the servant is a very tough transition. And again, remember, the other thing is on one project, you may be the God.
Right.
And on the next project you're managing, you are the servant.
Right.
And on the third project, it may be some mix of the two based on the needs of the project. That's what's becoming more nuanced.
I'm getting whiplash just thinking about that transition.
It is. It's tough, right? And I think it's one thing we're seeing as we continue to interview for folks to fill PM roles. we can see every candidate dealing with these questions,
So the good news that I'm hearing from you, Steve, is the demand is still growing.
Absolutely.
Both for traditional waterfall project management, double-digit growth there, plus the new area of agile or adaptive approaches is very hot as well, hotter even. But there's work for everyone in the project management space.
Right.
So when you guys are, you touched on interviewing, when you're looking at candidates who are trying to fulfill particular spots, what are some of the trends that you're seeing these days? What are some of the skill sets that are really in demand for project managers?
So what we're seeing is, just like anybody, I mean, when we're interviewing now, we're interviewing bimodal, right? We got to know if you're good at traditional. We got to know if you're good at agile. The in-between stuff, not most people haven't experienced that yet, but a few have. What we're seeing, by the way, I would point out, because of this bimodal trend, right? Being just good at agile isn't good enough either. So when we're interviewing somebody, we're looking for somebody who can do both. And so we'll see people come in who have extensive agile experience, have never done traditional project management. And they can't answer any questions about that side of it.
But I can imagine someone who cuts their teeth on one or the other really struggling.
Yes.
The first time I ever fully jumped into an agile project, it was not easy.
No kidding. Yeah. Right. And so
you have to let go of a lot.
You do. And I think part of it, what we're seeing on the interview side, this is more of a personal show, right? About you as a PM out there in the audience, right? First of all, my first advice would be honest. A lot of people are being pushed, I believe, by staffing agencies and other people, or even the market alone. And they're stacking their resume with Agile, for instance. It's like when you get into Agile with them, it's clear they do not understand it. And first of all, that's no crime.
Right.
Like not everybody's been exposed to it, but pretending you have been exposed to it is going to lose you to the job. Similarly, for the Agile folks who haven't done traditional project management, you've got to be honest about that and say, look, I'm an Agile practitioner. If you're looking for someone who is not got that traditional project background, the ideal answer to me is, let me tell you what I'm doing to get up to speed on that, right? I'm getting the certifications. I'm doing the studying. I'm shadowing people who are doing that mode that I'm not familiar with. That's what I would like to hear. What I don't want to hear is, I'm an expert in this. And then it's like,
no, you're not.
No, you're not. By the way, it's really funny in interviews. People try to be we as interviewers try to be very courteous, but what you see around the room is people shaking their head. No, you're already dead and you don't know it. You're the walking dead, right? Atlanta, it's appropriate. But that's something you don't want. So part of that is, how do you position yourself honestly in terms of your experience level? And then just come back with, what am I doing to get up to speed?
Right. And I think Agile requires a lot of humility in general as you're approaching it, that servant leadership idea. And it's easier for some people than others. You know, what's funny is I hear you talk about this concept of bimodal. It reminds me, one of my favorite theories in the world, and I'm sure I've mentioned it in previous podcasts, is Fielder's contingency theory. And Fred Fielder came out and said basically, and it doesn't apply exactly, but there is an aspect that does. He says basically you're either task-oriented primarily or you're primarily relationship-oriented, and that everybody's somewhere on a continuum. And his point was, and this is sort of my interpretation of his point, so I'm melding my opinion with his research now, but early in your career, being task-oriented really works well. You're handed a stack of documents, you're handed a bunch of customer complaints, and you have to just plow through them and get them done. But as you progress, you have to become more relationship-oriented in order to succeed. In other words, what got you there what got you here won't get you there.
Right.
And your success is contingent upon your ability to transition. And similarly in project management, I'm hearing you say that what you're interviewing for is somebody who can transition back and forth between, or blend best practices between the two. And I would imagine there are just a lot of people who struggle with that.
Yeah, I think there's very few people who are truly bimodal in that way, right? And so, but people can play both, right? The trick is, again, like we talked about earlier, do you want to?
Yeah.
Right. And so one of the stories we've talked about as we prepared for the show was I see a lot of traditional PMs coming in, getting their certification, right? I'm a Scrum Master now, right? And one of my favorite stories was I was an Agile coach, so I was helping Scrum Masters be better at what they do, right? And so I had this new PM who, was first Scrum Master assignment. They were all excited about it. And I went into the team room, typically co-locate in an Agile process. And I said, so how's it going? It's going good. Team's excited. It's great. We're getting good results.
Okay.
Right. By the way, that should be immediately interesting about the results, right? Yep. Traditional PMs are very driven by results no matter what, right? But how's the team doing?
Yep.
The team's getting results.
Okay.
That's not what I asked. And I mentioned earlier, I looked on the board and I saw Gantt charts for 2-week sprints. You have a Gantt chart for a 10-day sprint.
Okay, what's a Gantt chart?
So a Gantt chart is a traditional project management tool for 6-month to a year projects where you can see, we're going to do this from this date to this date, and then we're going to transition from this date to this date.
It has horizontal bars,
right.
and they kind of represent how long something's going to take, and they're stacked up.
Okay,
right.
I got it.
So instead of seeing a Gantt chart that said, here's a year-long project with, 1,000 lines, I saw Gantt charts with 3 or 4 lines going over 10 days.
See, that makes it agile.
And I said, what are those? It's Gantt charts, and they're working great. The team knows exactly what they're going to be doing in every day of the 10 days. And I backed off and I said, how am I going to deal with this? Because that's not how it works, right? So what that person was showing was fundamentally, they didn't really understand the Agile principles, never mind the practices, but also were struggling internally with, this is how I make a project work.
Right.
How can I turn Agile more into the thing I'm used to? So I can be comfortable.
Right.
And she was very comfortable. By the way, interesting thing was the team was also comfortable because they were like, oh, this is a traditional project. That's what I'm used to running too. So let's have cool Gantt charts.
Sure.
So the team was like, we love people telling us what to do.
Sure.
We're used to that. And the point is, that's not where you're supposed to be as a team. The goal of the Scrum Master is to coach. The goal of the team is to own. And they weren't owning, they were taking direction, just like they always did. And so what was funny was the PM, I should say the PM, but the Scrum Master was happy. The team was happy doing it the old way. And actually, the client was happy. But the Agile principles were all being violated.
It reminds me of a crazy scene in a Richard Pryor movie from probably the 70s. And he's giving this multi-level marketing presentation to a group of skeptical people. And one of the people in the audience says, hey, how do we know this isn't some pyramid scheme? And he goes, I'm glad you asked that. And he flips a chart, and it has a pyramid with the top lopped off. He said, this is a trapezoid. And it's that fourth side of the trapezoid that guarantees you unlimited wealth, and everybody's nodding and buying it at this point.
Right.
It's not a Gantt chart. This is an Agile chart.
Right. Exactly right. Right.
That's hilarious.
So the point is that person I was working with wasn't really comfortable with this new role they had, right? And so they tried to convert it to something they were used to and good at.
It's natural.
Natural thing. While if they had stepped back before they took the role, or maybe stepped back after they got their certification and said, how is this new process going to ask me to change? And do I want to change? Like a lot of the PMs I work with are type A personalities.
Yeah.
They're drivers. They don't trust people.
Okay.
The process assumes people are unreliable.
Not all type A people are just
Okay, I'm not saying that. There's clearly a spectrum here. But a lot of the PMs I meet who are that personality, they love it. And when they're asked to become a servant leader, they don't love it. Can they do it is different. Do they love it, right?
So, Steve, one of the things when I was talking through content and looking at some of the points that you've spoken to before, I was fascinated by a slide that you had. And it really made me start thinking about, the mindset of a leader in an Agile team versus a traditional team. And just some of these points that you're bringing up, it's like if I'm that person, where am I more comfortable? Am I more comfortable being the general?
The general, right.
Or the generalist, leading a team. So,
right.
There's some of those that you can see play out. Let's just talk through some of those characteristics where, if you're talking to that person who's trying to decide, where am I most comfortable? You mentioned servant leader. Am I comfortable embracing the role of servant leader, or am I more accustomed to being, no, I'm the one that everybody turns to and I tell them what to do?
Right. I mean, it's a lot like Hollywood, right? So there's two types of directors. My uncle's in the business. So
Okay.
There's two types of directors. One is the directive director. It's like, here's how I want it to go. Nothing off script. Nothing, execute, please, right? The second kind of director is the person who gets the most out of their actors by letting them have some freedom, right? The classic thing to me is the classic PM is usually more directive. We are going to do this, while the coach is more about questions. How do we feel about how the project is going? I had something yesterday, exact model of this. It says, classic PM would say, where's your project plan? We're just starting the project. And it's a third party, so we're kind of managing a third party, right? And they have a PM as well. And it's like, where's your project plan, right? As a coach, it's more like, are you ready to produce a project plan? And if you're not, why are you not? What are you uncomfortable with that would not allow you to go in front of our management and tell us? And that's what I need to know, because I can work on those things with you to help you resolve those issues. So now you are comfortable. The classic PM would have been, where's your damn project plan?
I just got out of a sailing school, believe it or not, which was just something I always wanted to do. And it was 2 weeks of living on a boat. One of the things that applies to this, though, we took turns cooking. And the skipper who was doing the instruction would go and he would look around. Like, people are constantly, when you're on the ocean, they're constantly coming up to you and saying, hey, I've got tuna, I've just got fresh lobster, we just caught X, Y, and Z. Well, he would take these things and look at it and go, okay, what ingredients do we have? What can we do with this? How should we marinate this? How should we do whatever? Me, I'm like, give me a recipe. Yeah, right, I don't want to be creative.
Right.
I need a formula to follow. But that's more my personality.
Naturally.
And so, naturally, that's my natural bent is you give me a recipe, I can follow. I'm pretty good in a kitchen, but you give me a bunch of Iron Chef, you open a refrigerator and here's your ingredients. I'm not going to be as strong. So,
and that's a real skill a Scrum Master should have, because many of the people on your team, like we mentioned earlier, would love for you to just give them a recipe.
Oh yeah.
I'm a coder. I just want to code.
Right.
I don't want to think about why we're doing this or how we could do it better. Just tell me what you want today, and I'll go to my desk and do that.
Tell me the outcomes you want and how we're going to measure them, and give me the test cases in advance, and we'll be fine.
So that's one of the challenges as a Scrum Master you have is I've got to get you out of that mode. Like, no, this is we, not me. The second part is I've got to get myself out of that mode that says, oh, you want direction? I know how to give direction. No, I'm not. I'm going to intentionally not give you direction. Even though I have it as a PM in my head, it's just running. I got it. As a Scrum Master, I have to sit back and say, I'm not going to give them the direction I've got in my head. They've got to figure this out.
It sounds like it's admirable or desirable to be able to be good at both of these. And so say you've got somebody who already, has waterfall down, but is like, I could do Agile. How can somebody actually get those skills and get that mindset and sort of make that transition?
Right. So I think there's two parts to that. That's a great question. The first one is, how do I get some exposure to this? It's the classic chicken and egg thing, right? Even for your career, which is, so you don't have any Agile experience. Well, I guess you're done.
Right.
No, you've got to demonstrate, you've got to find a way to get a taste of it.
Right.
Right. So at your current company, find an Agile team. Go observe them. Right. Shadow the Scrum Master. Shadow the team.
Find a mentor.
Someone who's done it. sure, get the certification, but then sit down with somebody who's done it and say, now tell me how this really works. That's what I find helps decide both things. One is it helps me understand what I'm really getting into versus just the book. Like I read the book. The second thing is it does start to give you that taste of, is this for me? Wow, that person has a real skill in terms of handling relationships and handling people. I might need some more training on that before I can really play that role, And the point is what I'm finding is that kind of proactive preparation shows up in the interviews, even if you haven't done it. Because what you see, and I think you've seen the same thing, is the key to me is they start using the language the right way, right? So they can have a certification and they know the words.
Yeah.
But it's when you listen to somebody and they use the words in a context where you can tell you've seen this before.
Right.
You've been in a scrum room and you start nodding your head, not no, but you start nodding your head going, yes.
Yeah.
And then you combine that with, but I don't have all the experience I would like to have, but my goal is to get more. That's when you see people in the room nodding their head, yes.
So you're a big proponent for self-awareness. So somebody needs to, first of all, realize.
Zen, yes.
Yeah, right.
Meditation.
Yeah.
Right.
I can see that's in you as a project manager.
Right.
But in all seriousness, as a project manager, we need to know what our strengths are.
Yes.
And if I've got areas that are weak, but I think, hey, I'm really interested in growing that side of me.
Right.
Maybe it's an agile practice or, for the agilist it'd be the other way around. But then again, looking at it and going, okay, is this really going to work out for me long term? Is this something that I could be really good at? Could I bring value to an organization with this skill set? And will I enjoy my job? Is this going to burn me out and make me miserable?
Right.
So those are good questions to ask. Now, one of the strategies that I like that you have put forth is, okay, when you come to this big question of is Agile right for me, you say either move on, move up, or move in.
Right.
So the move in is move into Agile. So find a mentor, find a coach,
sure.
find
go
examples,
for it.
Go for it.
Right.
What do you mean by move up, for instance?
So move up is a lot of project managers are ideal people to move up in their organizations and typically do, right? A lot of the managers you see, the directors are really former PM or PM-like people. Right. So there's tremendous opportunity to move up and basically out of kind of the traditional project management role.
So you could be a program manager, you could be a product manager,
right.
A product owner.
So move up the scale, right? Go to portfolio level, go to program level. Those are still there and they're still very traditional.
Yeah.
Right? So that's up.
Yeah. What about move on?
Move on is just maybe this isn't where your career needs to be.
Okay, so don't try to force being an agilist.
Right.
Embrace who you are.
And some of that might be just find the companies, and they're out there how long this strategy will last, I don't know. But there are still companies out there that are still very traditional, and those niches are out there. In the case of software development, you clearly can move on to something like construction that is much more traditional. So take your same PM skills, move them somewhere else where you're not going to face some of the challenges you're facing perhaps in software development, for instance.
Just a real quick question before we wrap it up here.
Sure.
How can somebody get more information about Agile to find out if it might be right for them?
Wow, if you can't find information about Agile, you're not trying very hard. So clearly the PMI has a whole forum, in Atlanta at least, has a whole forum around Agile.
Right.
As does IBA.
Yeah.
So there are lots of venues out there free of charge. You can go and attend and learn more about it. And by the way, those people presenting, I present a lot there. Those people presenting are deep into actually doing it. So you can start to get some of that flavor we talked about earlier. The second thing that I mentioned earlier was just find somebody who's doing it. It doesn't have to be even your company. Like go to the PMI, find some people at other companies are doing it and ask you if you can shadow them, right? Mm-hmm. The point is there's a lot of people out there doing it. Yes, you can read a book, but at some point you got to put the book down and you got to go see it. Go see it, right?
Yeah. Well, Steve, thanks so much. We appreciate your perspective. We appreciate your take on this issue. Before you go, we do have a gift for you.
The mug.
Yes, this is the famous Manage This coffee mug, and it works equally well for waterfall and Agile practitioners. So,
fantastic.
Thanks again for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We also want to thank our listeners for helping us by telling us what you'd like to hear on Manage This. Please don't stop. Send us your questions and what kind of guest you'd like to hear from. Just go to the VelociTeach Facebook page and use the comments section. In turn, we want to help you. And one way we do that is by providing PDUs, professional development units, just for listening to this podcast. To claim them, go to VelociTeach.com and choose Manage This Podcast from the top of the page. Click the button that says Claim PDUs and click through the steps. That's it for us here on Manage This. We hope you'll tune back in on October 16th for our next podcast. In the meantime, you can always visit us at VelociTeach.com/Manage This to subscribe to this podcast, to see a transcript of the show, or to contact us. And tweet us at manage_this if you have any questions about our podcasts or about project management certifications. We're here for you. That's all for this episode. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep calm and manage this.